Hello, everybody. This is Manoj Kulwal. I am the host for today's session. We have a few people still joining in, so let's give them a couple of minutes. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes. As I usually test, if a few of you can just click on yes in the chat if you're able to hear me, so I can confirm that the audio is working okay. All right, perfect. I got a yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll just start in a couple of minutes. Okay, perfect. So the attendees have stabilized. So okay, let's kick off then today's session. So welcome everybody for today's session. Today our topic is developing and implementing effective operational risk appetite framework. And today the expert speaker is Martin Davis, who's joining us from Singapore. So Martin is a risk framework architect who designs risk measurement systems for auditors and risk managers working in trading firms, energy houses, manufacturing companies, and financial institutions. He has more than 20 years experience developing bespoke risk reporting and scorecard assessment systems with a particular focus on operational audit, IT, finance, and transactional aspects of a business. He also has a very strong knowledge of business continuity, quality control, trade and supply chain resilience, valuation, and strategy. He's currently working with several companies throughout Southeast Asia and Middle East, assisting these organizations build industry best practice frameworks for operational risk. Working with risk managers, he has a strong knowledge of COSO, ISO 31000, credit assessment, and risk-based audit procedures at highly technical level. He's also very practical with his work, and you will see in some of the advice and guidance he's going to share with us that he really sort of focuses on the practical aspects. So you're not just going to get some high level theory, but actually hands-on experience and guidance from Martin today. But before I hand over the floor to Martin, I just want to run through a couple of introductory slides for IOR because some of the participants are new to IOR. So I want to give an introduction and then also talk about the certification initiative of IOR. So just give me 5 minutes to cover those slides and then I'll hand over the floor to Martin. So IOR, if you're not aware, IOR is Institute of Operational Risk. It's a global member-based organization which focuses purely on promoting the development of the operational risk discipline globally. And it does that by developing and sharing practical guidance with practitioners. So IOR has published various sound practice guidance documents on topics such as risk assessments, key risk indicators, even operational risk appetite, which is the topic for today. IOR has also developed independent professional certifications, which I'm going to mention, cover a little bit on the next slide. And IOR also undertakes research on emerging topics with various industry bodies and share the result of those research. And we also organize events. These can be face-to-face events, which are workshops across the different chapters globally, and also these online events, which then allow the global community to also come together. So this is sort of examples of various events IOR organizes, and you can see the list of the upcoming events on the IOR website in the event section. So if you're not already a member of IOR, please do consider, because there are lots of benefits in terms of becoming an IOR member, like access to the sound practice guidance, getting invitation for the various events, in the local chapters, and then also the recordings of these webinars are available only to the IOR members. So we have 7 or 8 webinars we've recorded on different topics over the last 18 months, and those recordings are available only to the IOR members. So I want to briefly talk about the Certificate of Operational Risk Management, which was introduced by IOR last year. So this was in response to a need in the industry where a lot of organizations needed an independent qualification they could get their employees through, and then they could demonstrate, to the risk committee or to the regulators or external stakeholders that people who are responsible for managing or working with operational risk actually understand the foundational concept of operational risk management. So it's aimed at individuals who may either be new to the operational risk discipline. So somebody may have worked in the compliance team or IT security team or audit team for 10, 15, 20 years. And if they're now joining the operational risk team, or they're joining a role which involves a closer management of operational risk, then the certification can give them a good foundation to understand all the basic concepts around operational risk management. So it's a foundational certification. Yeah, it doesn't make you the master or the guru of operational risk management, but it ensures that at least you are aware of all the fundamental concepts. So it's mainly targeted at professionals who are new to the operational risk discipline, and professionals who have experience can also go through the certification in case they need to demonstrate to their internal stakeholders or to the external stakeholders that they actually understand the operational risk management discipline. And we're getting a lot of organizations who are getting the first line, so various individuals in the first line certified, because the individuals in the first line, they're doing a daily job. Operational risk is not necessarily their full-time responsibility, but you want to ensure that they at least understand the fundamental concepts around operational risk management. So we have various large banks which are, getting 20, 30, in some cases, more than 100 people in the first line certified through the certification, so that they can establish a common understanding around the different operational risk concepts in the organization. So it's a THE regulated by Ofqual in terms of accreditation. So it's not just something IOR issues, but IOR had to go through a very rigorous process with ATHE, and then the certification is issued by ATHE. So IOR has to ensure that the quality of the certification is maintained at a very high level. It's equivalent of level 4 QCF in UK and level 5 EQF in Europe. So it's just under the graduate degree level is where the certification is targeted. The study method is self-learning, so there are still no training courses or institutions where you can go and attend training courses. That may come some stage in the future, but at the moment, if you register for the certification, then you get a workbook, and you have to self-learn, and it requires about 130 to 50 hours of study. And then the workbook covers the 9 chapters, which are mentioned on the right-hand side. So all the fundamentals around all the key concepts are covered in the workbook. And the workbook was created by 25, 26 different operational risk practitioners, from different organizations. So it really sort of reflects, the standard widely used practices within the industry. Once you have studied for the exam, then you can appear for the exam. Exam is online, so you don't have to go to any particular center, and then you'll have an online invigilator who will be sort of watching you during the exam to ensure there's no cheating going on. And in the exam, you have there are 15 multiple choice questions. You get 75 minutes, so there's ample time to answer the questions, and the passing marks is 60%. So you need to get 60% of the questions right to earn the certification. The costs are $550 plus VAT if you're in UK, and that includes the study workbook, it includes the exam fee, and you also get a 1-year IOR associate membership if you're not already an IOR member. And then benefits, like I've highlighted, yeah, for individuals, if they're new to the discipline, then it gives them an entry point into the discipline where they can demonstrate to whatever new job or new role they are starting in that they understand the fundamental concepts. And then the benefit for organizations, that they can develop a common understanding using the certification across the second line, third line, first line stakeholders, and also then provide an assurance to, so they can say to the risk committee that we have, yeah, these individuals who are dealing with operational risk, they've gone through this independent certification. So it sort of provides an opportunity to give that assurance to the different stakeholders that they at least understand the fundamental concepts of operational risk. So if you're interested in that certification, then a lot of information is available on the website, and about 150 operational risk practitioners have already registered and they're going through the certification. Around 40 professionals have already passed the exam, and on the IOR website, you'll be able to see some of the quotes, from the people who've done the course. So that can also give you an indication of the benefits of the certification. So with that, let's go into today's session. So today it's 90 minutes in total. We'll use it as a discussion format, and then you can keep posting questions as we cover the slide content. So while the live webinar is free, where we allow members and non-members to come in, the recording of the webinar will only be available to the IOR members in the members area. For the slides, there will be a link Martin will show later. So if you want to get hold of the slides, then you can take that link and download the slides from there. Okay, so with that, let me transfer the access to Martin. Okay, so Martin, I've made you the presenter.
Okay, hi Manoj, how are you? Thanks for that introduction, that's really good. I'll just show my screen. Let me get my presentation up. There we go. And you should be able to see my screen, is that correct?
I am, yes.
The audience view comes up, so I'll try and maintain it so that I'll move at a pace so that everybody can see the slides. Good morning, everyone. In fact, good afternoon for those in Asia and good morning for those in Europe. Nice to be talking today on operational risk appetite. Although this presentation that I'm going to give will cover risk appetite at a top level, at an enterprise level, taking in examples from market risk, operational risk, and credit risk. I am a banker, and so a lot of my examples will come from banking in the markets. For those that can see the screen, there is a QR code out there, which you can just put your mobile phone and photograph that with the Causal Capital logo in it, and that will take you straight to the presentation I'm showing right now. Or you could type in http://bit.ly/2, and it is case sensitive, I believe, to capital N, capital M, small w, small h, Z7. That will also take you to the presentation. At any point in time, feel free to send questions through to Manoj, and he will stop me or intervene. I'm not going to be watching the monitor, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I'll put the camera on just for a moment so that you can see. We had a bit of a joke about this, that I am actually here, Martin Davies in the office, all suited and booted as on a typical working day. I may not keep the camera running because it uses bandwidth, and I would prefer to share the screen rather than my face. I'm sure many of you could probably agree with that. Okay, so I'm just going to pop off this for a moment, but I will come back on from time to time just to show you that it is me and not a mannequin or a recording or anything like that. Okay. Right. So
Martin, just I have pinged the link in the chat window to all the audience. So in case you don't want to type that link, you can just click on the link from the chat window and get the slides.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, do check that out, and let's see if it's working. By the way, there will also be a spreadsheet that's shown. I show a Monte Carlo model that's running. Quite interesting Monte Carlo model. We'll get to that all in good time. That is also available. If you get this presentation down, you'll find a link in there that you can click that will allow you to download the spreadsheet as well. If you have any trouble with the slides whatsoever, or the spreadsheet models or anything else that's shared, or other links that are shared in the presentation, just ping me or Manoj in LinkedIn and things, and we will then supply them with various materials. Okay. All right, so there we can see a picture of, right at the front, operational risk appetite, and you can see a couple of skiers about to leap into the snowfields with a border in front of them. This is not just one of those photos off the internet. It's actually a real live photo taken only about 4 or 5 weeks ago with myself and my family skiing in Thredbo, of all places, in Australia. Yes, most people think Australia is a hot climate, but it does have a winter, although coming into spring now. And I mean, when you think about a photo like that, I mean, it really does, it does paint a reality. Skiing, for those that do it or don't do it, is actually quite a dangerous activity. And I mean, while I was skiing that day, I saw several people coming off the fields with all sorts of various injuries. And as it is with all objectives, some objectives are inherently more risky than others. And the idea simply about risk appetite is being able to express that naturally. Okay, so let's move through the slides. I'm going to just pop on to next slide. A little bit about me. I'm a banker. I've worked for many banks over the years. In fact, actually, I now work for Causal Capital, providing all sorts of risk management support and consulting work for banks around the region. And you can see some of the banks listed there, from Bank Muscat, Metro Bank, Commonwealth Bank, PNB Paribas. These are the type of clients that we're working with day to day. And you can see some of the courses that we've got here. This is in the Philippines. We run a huge, big operational risk program where we helped bankers set up risk registries and actually go out and properly assess risk. And I mean, this is a fantastic program, and that's what we do in Causal Capital. We're not just focusing on operational risk, but we've got a very heavy focus on banking. Yeah. Okay, so that's what I do. I'm one of the risk analysts. I specialize in building risk frameworks. And today, we're going to talk about risk appetite. Now, I'll start off very simply going through a few definitions so that we're on the same page. Yep. And then from that, I'll move more deeply into the slides. Right. So I believe before you attempt anything in life, whether it's skiing, in Thredbo, or whether it's building a risk appetite reporting system, that you start off with a definition. You need to have a definition, because otherwise you really are unanchored with the way you're doing things. Yep. So let's start off with 3 definitions. Risk appetite, risk tolerance, and look at where these are going right and going wrong. Okay, so I see risk appetite quite simply. I'd like to keep things simple at this level as the amount or type of risk that an organization is prepared to seek or accept or tolerate, and let's add in that, as they go about obtaining their objectives. Yep. So how much uncertainty or volatility risk a system can absorb before it fails as you go out, yep, to obtain your objective. Okay, you can adjust these definitions around as much as you want. And sitting in the background, I'll bring up a document. You'll see my screen change for a moment. This is the FSB guidelines on definitions for risk appetite frameworks, risk appetite statements, risk capacity. And if we just scroll to the next page here, it defines, the FSB defines risk appetite as the aggregated, I like this definition a lot, the aggregated level and types of risk a financial institution is willing to assume within its risk capacity to achieve its strategic objectives and business plan. And I think that's a beautiful definition, yeah, and it's quite clear. But I mean, you yourself should be, as a risk manager, creating your own risk appetite statements, yeah, and it should be something very simple, very straightforward to appreciate. Anyway, we'll come back to that later on. I'm just going to shoot back to the presentation for a moment. Here we go. Okay. So what about tolerance then? People say, well, I've got appetite for risk and tolerance. Well, tolerance is an organization's or stakeholders' readiness to bear the risk after risk treatment in order to achieve its objectives. Do I like that statement? This is a statement from ISO 31000. I find that statement not to be consistent with other opinions. I'll be clear, and I'll re-emphasize this later on. I see risk appetite as the amount of uncertainty, volatility, types of uncertainty, you're willing to absorb, you are willing to absorb, in pursuit of an objective. That's how I see risk appetite. Risk tolerance is how much the system can absorb before it fails. These are like very straightforward, really simple definitions, and we need to keep it simple because it's going to get complicated as we move further on. Okay, now we've been talking about risk, and if you say the amount of risk that I'm willing to absorb, the amount of risk I'm willing to take on in pursuit of an objective, you then need to say, well, what is risk? Now, ISO 31000 defines risk as, and it's very simple, 3 keywords: the effect of uncertainty on objectives. That's the ISO 31000 definition of risk. I think greatly of this definition of risk. It's simple, it's tacit, it's very straightforward to understand, but it's misunderstood by many people. And let's just clear out a couple of those misdemeanors before we carry on. First of all, we have risk in the past and in the future. People say, no, Martin, the past is fixed. But I can tell a story many years ago when I was working for a bank and we had a large fraud, and it upset the board a lot. And they said, we want you to audit this department, get down to the crux of what happened, find out which controls failed, why we had this fraud. And after as much assessment as we did and as much review, and I mean, we went through everything, we couldn't find the root cause because the systems themselves were not capturing that information. And on our audit report, we wrote the following statement. While we understand what has occurred, we are unable to ascertain the root cause or which control brought about this fraud. And that information will never be able to be accumulated because it's in the past. So we realize that the past is incomplete, depending on how we frame it. The future is definitely uncertain. And in fact, actually, the further you go out in the future, the more uncertain it becomes. So there is a relationship often with the time effect of future. And what a lot of people get wrong with this definition of risk is that there are 2 things. And first of all, and I'm a big believer on this, both mathematically and logically thinking, there's no such place as zero risk. This is really important from a risk appetite perspective. So when people say to me, I have no appetite for this risk, I have to question, is this actually possible? If you were to entertain an objective with a risk, and you have no appetite for the risk, are you actually on the right objective? Maybe you need to consider that. I believe there is not a place of perfect certainty. That means I can forecast the future with 100% accuracy. There's always some sort of residual risk that you cannot mitigate away. So right up front, we need to accept, there is no such place as zero risk. In addition to that, I see that it is possible you could have an adversity of some kind that could lead to an opportunity, and you say, wow, I didn't realize that, that great things could come from entertaining this. And consequently, risk is not just negative things, it's a positive thing. Now, a lot of people get this completely wrong. They say, oh no, the positive aspect of risk is actually the objective. I don't agree. There is an objective with uncertainty. That uncertainty could actually have both positive and negative outcomes. And that uncertainty in the future cannot be taken to zero. So this is very, very important that we take this on board as a risk definition. Otherwise, you can never really get about appetite. Okay. So there we have our risk appetite statement. On the previous slide, which I'm just refreshing, the amount or type of risk that an organization is prepared to seek, accept, or tolerate. This is the IOR definition of risk, and here we actually have on the next slide the definition of risk itself. Okay, so there we go. We can start off. We've got our definitions in place. Let's start to look at where we go from here. Now, before we get there, I want to like to make reference to a couple of sources, 2 or 3 sources of confusion. The first one is from the ISO 31000 community itself. Now, ISO 31000 is a global risk standard, as we made reference to before. If you are to read this standard, I mean, all the documents underneath the standard, taking in 31000, 31010, and ISO 73, it will become apparent that some parts of the standard are not consistent. And on top of that, the practitioner community themselves debate, often in heated ways, Some of them actually disband risk appetite entirely and actually don't agree to such a thing. Yeah. So you have here a source of confusion. Yeah. And let's just put this to the side for a moment. Yeah. And I will prove in a moment that like risk appetite is a real living thing. Yeah. That we all have. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if you call it risk appetite or the levels of risk you want to accept. This is inconsequential, it's fastidious. Risk appetite is an important activity of risk management, and we'll get to that later on. Okay, so there's our first source of confusion. There's a lot of people debating, oh, it doesn't exist, and like it's just a, I mean, the great joke at the moment is, we shouldn't use ideas of appetite or eating food with risk management, which is again, like, it's just confusion. It's just a source of confusion. Risk appetite is nothing new. It's been going on for like 50, 60 years. There are documents. I can dig out documents. There are Nobel laureates and prize winners that wrote papers 50 years ago, and they have made reference to risk appetite. So it's not a new thing, and it's something that we need to just naturally understand. The next source of confusion is a bit of a disappointing one, and it's important. There aren't just one group of people in an organization, certainly banks. I mean, in fact, a bank is laden with risk departments. You've got credit risk, market risk, anti-money laundering, compliance, and governance team, operational risk performance, operational risk control. I worked for a bank once. We had so many operational risk departments, they opened another one called operational risk simplification, which is like, I mean, what they did there, I don't know. I was scared to ask, to be honest with you. Nonetheless, with all of these different silos of risk management and different perspectives on risk management, we're likely to have some conflicts of interest here. Let's just have a look at this and why people have a confusion with risk appetite. And this is one of the sources you have. When you go to a compliance person and you say to a compliance person, do you have an appetite for this compliance control or this control of compliance? They'll look at you with dismay. They'll be shocked. They'll say, look, risk is a bad thing. We're trying to be compliant. How can you even question whether I have an appetite for it or not? If I have an appetite for it or not means I would entertain the negative side. So compliance people are often very difficult to deal with because they see risk as only a negative thing, and consequently appetite doesn't fly with them. Enterprise risk people are also falling into this camp. They believe that positive risk is an absurd idea. How can I have positive risk? How can anything be positive? And a lot of these people in the enterprise risk planet are modeling risk as risk equals the probability times impact. And when you see risk in those kind of frames, the idea of risk appetite is going to be bizarre. It's going to be weird and strange, and it's going to be abnormal. And I honestly believe a lot of the reasons why the ISO 31000 community has come off the rails is because it's dominated by compliance people and project risk people and ERM risk people. However, in the context of banking, for us, we are very comfortable with both positive and negative risk. In fact, a market going up could be positive or negative depending whether you are long or short that position. And we look at risk far more purely mathematically as volatility or uncertainty around an opportunity. So for us, the concept of zero risk is completely absurd, because if risk is uncertainty, we know that we can't have certainty, so there's no such thing as zero risk. And that's as simple as we look at it. And in that respect, having a risk appetite in play is quite a normal thing. Okay, so this is one of the sources of confusion. Let me go through the last source of confusion that I see that's really damaging the risk community in a big way. And I call this bias. There's a big trend at the moment with risk managers themselves to say, well, what is the accurate answer? What's the exact answer to uncertainty? Well, of course, uncertainty may have many outcomes, and people say, I don't quite grasp what you mean. Well, uncertainty, I can measure risk. Yes, you can measure risk, but it always sits across a probability spectrum, a spectrum of outcomes. None of those outcomes are actually realized until they actually happen. So consequently, two people could look at those outcomes or list of outcomes and be on differing levels of comfort around them based on their experience to life. I'll give you an example. So I showed a picture right up front of me skiing in Thredbo, a beautiful part of the world. let me tell you, the very first time I went skiing, I had no idea what the hell was going on. I was sitting on this chair, very cold, with next to this lady, and she says, "Oh, have you ever skied before?" I said, "No, this is my first time." She says, "How do you feel at the moment?" And I said, my uncertainty is at its maximum. I'm not even sure how to get off the chair. This is a very uncomfortable place to be. Now, of course, I've experienced it, so I have experience around it, and I know what's dangerous and what's not dangerous. So when you look at people, depending on their experience, their culture, their history, what they're trying to achieve, their levels of comfort around different risks are based on who they are, and consequently, they become biased. In fact, there was a study done. It's mentioned right here. You can see the two people. They won Nobel Prizes for this, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. These guys basically said a lot of people's bias around risk is based on how much they actually have. So if someone's already eating risk, they've already got a lot of it on their plate, they're already dealing with large potential losses, putting more on their plate, they may not have any more appetite for it. And this is a concept of where appetite kind of gets born. That the more risk you put on an institution, in the end, it cannot accommodate this. So risk, these centers of confusion are very important to understand, and they come in bias. They come in the different people of who we are, the way we actually look at risk from the ground up, and of course they come in the standards themselves, which are inconsistent. All right, let's forget this for a moment and just give me an example, Martin, straight up, of appetite right now. One example. Let's have just a pure example of appetite. I love this. We're all bankers today, or a lot of us are bankers. And so I'm going to use a banking example, something I'm very comfortable with. And people don't think about it until they're actually facing this opportunity. I have here a chosen risk. So when a bank lends money, whether it's out the door to a corporate, whether it's on a personal loan, it's immediately taking a risk. It's taking a risk of default. That is, the obligor will not repay the loan when due or there any time thereafter. I'm quoting Basel in part here. Okay, simple. I lend money, it may not come back to me. Okay, so where's the concept of risk appetite here? Here's the paradox. People think, do you want good customers or do you want bad customers? Well, actually, the naughty customers, the difficult customers, the bad ones are more profitable. People go, no, seriously? Yeah, absolutely. And you can see it here in our credit ratings, credit spreads. At the top here, I've got a table. If I plot that table through time, you make most of your money. You make more profit from putting $100 on a C-rated loan than you would on an A-rated loan. And consequently, bankers are propelled to chase a higher yield. If I make money, I want to make money. What do you want to do? We're not going to make very much money on an A-rated business. AAA rated business, you'll make far more money by investing in subprime, really subprime business. And consequently, there are two paradoxes that come out from this. That not only is risk tied to yield, but actually that it's valuable. That is, the more risk I have, the more yield I'm going to have. And this confuses a lot of people away from banking. I mean, without any matter of fact. I mean, and we've got to be very clear, we suffered a global financial crisis because people were unable to understand what I'm showing you all right here, right now. When they saw an A-rated loan, AAA rated loan, that was competing with US treasuries, paying a B and a C rated yield, they accommodated this en masse. And we all know the outcome of the global financial crisis. Those people that invested in collateralized debt obligations that were paying AAA rated yields should have asked themselves, why am I getting a high yield for no risk? There's a free lunch here. And we found out, of course, there isn't a free lunch. So even quite recently, people make very bad decisions about risk appetite. In fact, actually, the global financial crisis is one of the reasons we're here today talking about it, and one of the reasons that regulators have completely changed the ruling and said, we can't have financial reports. We need to have financial reports, financial risk reports that are connected with appetites. Okay, this is great, lovely. Moving along, there's a direct example of appetite working for me. Let me look at the types of people around appetite. And this is quite fascinating. You're going to see two slides coming up. These are things that I've drawn with my risk classes to type of explain risk attitude, risk appetite, simple things. I want to focus on the right side of the page at the moment. Now you'll see four people. There are 4 common types of people you come across in life when it comes to risk management, and they're worth talking about at the moment in the concept of appetite. So when I think of appetite, I think of people, risk, and the types of people that operate in appetite. It's quite fascinating. We'll take the first one. The first one is what I call, well, it says up there, ignorance is bliss. This is the complete idiot. Yeah. So they entertain objectives without understanding the risk under those objectives. They don't fully understand it. It's like someone says to me, Martin, I would like to go swimming. Okay, so I take you out in a boat, out into the ocean, and I say, right at the edge before we jump in, have you ever swum before? Well, no, I haven't actually. Is it safe to jump in the water? Well, obviously you're likely to drown, aren't you? So that's an idiot. That's someone that like entertains object, and there's lots of them. There are lots of people that invested in instruments during the global financial crisis they didn't understand. Yeah, Lehman Brothers mini bond fiasco was full of retail investors, and only a few months ago there were people losing money by buying options on VIX. They were shorting VIX when it was on the floor. You have to be an idiot to do this. Yeah, it's a very dangerous position. It's picking up coins in front of a steamroller. So there are lots of happy idiots out there. Yeah, and this is a type of person that we come across in risk management. So if I was to assess risk in an organization, I'd like to be able to identify what I'm going to classify the idiots, yeah, the people that are taking risks but don't understand the potential implications. There are lots of those. The one that I really dislike, though, is what I've got at the bottom. This is the criminal. This is someone that actually knows the risk. They know the dangers, but they're unwilling to be accountable for the choices they make. So they try to privatize profits and socialize losses. Yeah. So anything that's good comes to them. Anything bad, they make sure other people wear that outcome. This is completely evil. I mean, Nassim Taleb, if you follow the author, has just written a book on this called Skin in the Game. And he's quite heavy-handed with a lot of people. And he says, like, you are taking a risk to profit from that, but you make me share in the outcome of the negative side while you share in the pot. This is an unfair, there's an unequitable behavior. There are lots of those in the world as well. Although less of them these days, because one of the changes that we've seen in the since the global financial crisis is new regulations on making bankers particularly accountable for the choices they make, so that when they sell a product to a customer, they have to retain risk in that product. You want to sell me a loan, you want to sell me an investment, you have to eat it too. If you can't eat it, then you shouldn't be selling it to me. So these criminals are becoming a lot less of them these days. My risk appetite framework, by the way, is more targeting the other two, the two in the middle. So I've got my happy idiot on one side and I've got my criminal on the other, but most of the people you'll come across in an organization are not pathological like the other two. They're the conservative and non-conservative person. So the conservative person takes risk, but they're not comfortable with the tail. So they'll say, listen, given the expected outcomes, I'm willing to take this risk, but my risk appetite ends at this position. This is the type of person you want to deal with. But the other type of person, and they're very common, you come across in institutions, they'll say, look, I've got this risk, I'm willing to take this expected risk, but I don't know where the tail is. And if I accept that tail, well, I'm not even sure I can accept it yet. So the idea of a risk appetite framework is to allow us to present the objectives and the known risks, the known unknowns that may happen, the tails, to our management. Say, are you comfortable with these tails? Can you accommodate these tails? Yes or no? And if you can't accommodate tails, then we have to transact them away, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. This is the entire purpose of a risk appetite framework. It is to identify, well, first of all, is to identify, we get the happy and the criminals, but forget those people. It's the majority of people we're dealing with, is to show them what's expected from an objective, what's unexpected, yeah, and how to treat the tail risks. So that's what we're trying to deal with a good risk appetite framework. Now, this doesn't always work out. I've got a beautiful example on the next slide. I mean, this photograph is just absolutely incredible. What you're seeing here is a nearly a $2 billion asset, yeah, that has exploded. In fact, actually, it's falling apart. It didn't survive. Those that made the decision to bring it into this condition, a lot of them didn't survive either. Well, what we're talking about here is this is a direct outcome, not of risk, of the failure of risk appetite. The system that was being used here I mean, for what it's worth, this is BP's Transocean Deepwater Horizon explosion. Deepwater was a deepwater oil rig. It was an exploratory vessel that was going out there looking for oil aquifers, and it actually discovered a really big one, might I add. It was running behind on its project. It was over its time by nearly a third of its, 300%, and it had a control failure. And the operators said, well, we should really investigate this control failure. Should we or should we not? And they said, well, that's going to take more time. So they decided to run the risk. But of course, then there was a tail outcome. Now, the tail outcome was so big that they destroyed the asset. And you're seeing a photograph of that here. What's fascinating is the following thing that comes after this: is the US government suffered an outcome of this, or the entire United States community. Millions of barrels of oil were spilt into the sea day after day after day that ended up on the shores of the United States, the beaches up, the waterways, that damaged the fishery industry. And the government said, look, enough is enough. Someone has to be held accountable for this. This outcome. We're going to do an investigation. It took several years. We're going to find out if the root cause was based on you not knowing the tail risk. We're going to fine you $1,000 a barrel. However, if we found that you were grossly negligent, that means you're fitting in that criminal space that I was talking about before, we're going to fine you $4,300, nearly 4 times the barrel. Per barrel. As it was, and you can read it, there's a link there that goes straight to the news article, the US court system found BP to be grossly negligent. And consequently, they're now paying a fine of into the $23 billion plus mark. It's going to take a decade to get out of this position. They were found to be grossly negligent. Well, the reason why the penalty was so high was because the risk appetite was not followed. The risk appetite of a blowout control was just ignored. That means the operators assumed the tail risk and passed on the outcome, not just to themselves, but to the community. And that's why the implications were so high. This is where the world is changing. So in the past, I could suffer, I could make other people suffer. However, now I have to actually take on and consider the appetite of these other people. Now, you can't consider people's appetite. We've discussed this already. There's bias around that. But what you should be doing is saying, hey, this is my objective, and these are the potential outcomes. Do we accept these outcomes? And that is what a healthy risk appetite system is. And it starts off by asking various questions. Now, I sat down one day and I thought to myself, if I'm to, assess risk appetite, how do I actually do that? I mean, what do I do? And I sat down and pondered on 18 key questions, and they are transformative questions. What I mean by a transformative question is that one question leads to another. And after you answer that question, it's like one of those Russian dolls. You then open it and there's another doll inside that. That then takes you down another. It's a pathway. And you get to the end of it to know whether you are comfortable or not. So first thing we need to start off with is I have an objective. Explore new markets. Let's do a merger and acquisition, hostile takeover, whatever it is, ski a mountain. Our picture right at the front of this presentation. Well, if you want to ski a mountain, it starts with the following inherent threats. You need to prepare for them. They're going to come up as a cost. You need to be prepared for them. Air quality and temperature is low. I mean, you can fall down. It's very dangerous. And the surface is slippery. So there's a chance of slipping aside. Do you accept right up front these threats? If you say, no, I don't accept these threats, then you need to circumvent the activity entirely and say, well, we're going to entertain another objective. But if you say, yes, I accept that, I accept this, I'm willing to tolerate these, the next thing you have to ask yourself is, what's the opportunity cost of tolerating those? And are we happy with the inherent threats? And if we're not, what do we change to make ourselves happy? And the whole set of 18 questions just literally navigates yourself around a pathway, and you'll end up at the bottom with either, yes, we can actually go forwards with this, or no, we shouldn't be doing this. I mean, it takes in all sorts of things, like I don't like this particular risk that I'm going to face, I'm going to choose to control it. I can afford to control that risk. And then it asks itself, like, what's our residual? Do we have iatrogenic outcomes? That means after controlling it, do you actually end up causing more problems than you had before you had the objective? So this is a very natural way. And I've sat down and thought this through. By the way, this slide took maybe 10 minutes to build, but it's taken hours to ponder on. And I believe that if you are to have a good risk appetite framework in place, you should be entertaining these types of activities. You should be asking questions around your controls. Are they iatrogenic? You should be doing back tests and stress tests and sanity tests on your objectives. You should be doing all of these types of things. I mean, you should be looking not just at a risk by itself singularly, but as a portfolio. These are all very important outcomes of a risk appetite framework, but it can be summarized entirely by this slide you've got here. All right, nice.
Martin.
Let's have an example. Yes, Manoj.
Hey, okay, so quick question here. So I see from the nature of the questions, so I just want to understand the first line and second line. So if we use that as in the 3-line of defense model, that a lot of these questions, the second line will not be able to answer, right? Because they are more first line in terms of what do we want to achieve? What is the opportunity cost? So I see it's the first line trying to answer this question, and second line is facilitating it, and then together you're sort of determining what is the risk appetite on whatever initiative. So if you're discussing whether we're going to launch a new product and we want to make $20 million from this new product in the next 3 years, that if that is what we are discussing, then do you see this as first line only doing this, or second line and first line doing this? How is that interaction happening?
No, the business, the first line has an objective, whether it's lending to clients, helping investors, whatever it may be. That's beside the point. The first line will have appetites. Believe me, even if they're set or not set formally, there are appetites going on. I've gone in and I've walked into business units and I said, hello, good afternoon. I'm from the operational risk department here today. I've come here to talk about operational risk. And they've said to me, what the heck is that? Which means that it's not formalized at all. But that doesn't matter. When I start talking to these people, even though they don't even have a risk framework in place, I ask them, would you do your current activities if these following conditions were present? They say, oh, no, that's definitely unacceptable. So everybody has appetites. We all have appetites. These questions are, as you rightly said, they're for the first line. If you want to use the first, second, third line, they're for the first line. The role, the second line of defense is to facilitate these questions. That is our role. As operational risk, my job is to make sure that I have ascertained I have an understanding, or the business has an understanding, formally is documented, these questions. Yeah, and is that a lot of work? If you have a risk framework in place, this would be added to the existing framework, if you know what I mean. And we'll talk about integration of risk appetite later on. It's an integrated activity. That's what the FSB says. It's integrated activity. So yes, these are questions that are performed by the first line of defense. The role of the second line of defense is the following: to come up with the questions, to explain the meaning of those questions to the business unit, to make sure that the questions are addressed consistently across the organization, to capture that information in a system so that it can be reviewed by the third line of defense and by the stakeholders. That is our job. That is our role. We cannot possibly answer those questions. I mean, if someone says to me, shall I lend to this client or not? Well, that's the choice of the credit team. The operational risk team can only opinion, oh, these are very risky loans. And the credit department may say, well, not risky for the following reasons. We have an appetite for it. Or they may say, yes, you're right. This is risky. This is risky business. We've actually chosen to take this risk. So the operational risk department, the second line of defense here, is supposed to facilitate this infrastructure, not do anything else with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then so Martin, there are two contexts then I see in which we can apply these questions. So one context is, let's say, when we are defining our strategy, for the next year, for the next 3 years, and we are saying, okay, we want to increase the revenue, profit, whatever strategic objectives the organization is defining. Then you go through this process to ensure that you're thinking about all the risks you'll be taking to achieve that strategy, and then you're agreeing what your risk appetite is to achieve that strategy. So that could be one context. It's just the periodic strategic planning. Or it could be a one-off initiative where we're saying, okay, we need to upgrade our core banking IT system. It's going to cost us $60 million over the next 3 years to upgrade that. So should we go ahead with that, and what are the risks we're taking? Or if we're launching a new product, we have some targets around the revenue for that new product. So that's where also risk appetite, you need to think about risk appetite in those individual business initiatives, and you need to think about risk appetite at the organizational and a strategy perspective.
That's true, and that you will find at times it's not going to work out. There will be conflicts of interest, but that's another debate entirely.
Yeah, and which tells me the reason I wanted to go into that is that risk appetite is a very dynamic concept, right? That you cannot have the second line, defines the risk appetite, and you create, let's say, a 50-page document, and now it stays like that for 4 years or 5 years. That it's not static like that, right? It's very dynamic in nature, because as your business is changing, your appetite needs to change.
I mean, this is a problem at the moment. What I'm seeing organisations do, and it's utter tripe for what I said. Tripe, by the way, is an English word for offal, the stuff you throw away and you don't want to eat. Yeah, is they're just writing these tomes of documents. Like I've read a risk appetite. Someone sent me the other day a risk appetite document they wanted me to read. They said, "What do you think of this?" I said, it's like 45 pages. It's not even enforceable. It was like all weird policy. I mean, they said, well, we've done this and we're going to submit this to the regulator and then we're going to file it. I said, well, that's a fail, isn't it? Really, it's not. A risk appetite's a dynamic thing where you actually make a decision. Shall I do this? I'm not sure. Maybe I should get another manager in. Or I've identified an uncertainty. God, this could have like great outcomes. I better actually share knowledge on this. And then we have a meeting with the stakeholders. The stakeholders actually then vote on it and say, well, this is not a good risk. We should not take this. That's how a dynamic risk framework should be running. I actually, by the way, there are a lot of people critical of risk appetite. I actually see it as a natural thing we are all doing all the time, making decisions about shall I or shall I not take the risk. And once I do take the risk, I accept the accountability for the outcome. That's what it is. But yeah, to go back to your first question, this is definitely done at a strategic level. It's done at a tactical level, both places. For new products, a loan. A customer may come in and say, hello, I would like a loan, and they're a corporate business, and then I would then go through, but I will be assessing that loan with key criteria that are already defined for me. And then I say, this client doesn't fit, they're not getting the right ratios, they're trying to apply a loan to a business strategy that this bank doesn't endorse, they'll have to decline this or have to escalate this. That means that decision is outside your authority, it's not within the appetite of the institution.
Right.
I can give you examples of this. I was working for a bank, a global markets company, large, I'm not going to say its name, and they wanted to release a new product that had massive wrong way risk in it. Now, of course, the sales team said, oh, this is great, we want to release it, our customers are asking for it. The credit and market risk team were not comfortable with this product. The operational risk team said, oh, we don't have an issue with it. We can enact and we can transact it. But the credit markets risk team said, we're not comfortable with the types of risks you're taking. We're not going to give a sign off on this. And then the product was put on hold. So it's quite natural for a control function to say they're not comfortable with the risk and then explain why, and why they don't like the risk. And that will be a healthy functioning system. And then, of course, the product has to be treated or disbanded or changed or modified so that it fits the appetite of all the stakeholders that are involved in making a decision on whether it should or should not be approved.
Yeah, and there's a question here from Tina Martin around what we are discussing. So I'll take that question now. So we talked about sort of first line, second line. So at least from the second line operational risk perspective, their role is to basically give this thinking, okay, how business can think about the risk appetite in a structured way, because like you said, they already have the risk appetite. It may just not be written like a risk appetite, but they already know what the risk appetite is. So second line just needs to give them some tools and process that how they can document and make that risk appetite more explicit rather than just sitting in people's head.
I mean, let's be real for a moment. I mean, let's just play this out as you are in life. Imagine you are sitting in a business unit, and you are not required to set any kind of appetite statement or measure risk. I would do this secretly in the background. I wouldn't tell anybody. People say, why would you do that secretly in the background? Well, quite simply, I get paid commissions for making profits. Why would I want to draw management's attention to potential downsides? And it's only going to make my life difficult. And anybody who works in a bank knows this to be true. So the second line of defense is there to bring out existing appetites that are currently in play. But for what it's worth, might I say, I'm actually not only an operational risk guy. I started my career in operational risk, but I became a credit risk guy. Credit risk has had this mentality of risk appetites for a very long time. So like in banks, the thing is, though, in credit risk, we don't talk about it. No one ever asks us, why would we tell them about our risk appetites?
Yeah.
And so the job of operational risk is to identify some of these appetites, where they begin and where they end.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's to then challenge, right? Because if first line is taking reckless risk, so in that sort of happy category where they are going ahead with achieving some objectives, but they've not really done the homework in terms of the risks they will be taking, then that's where second line can then challenge, saying, hey, you should not be going ahead with this product because you have not done the right amount of thinking.
Maybe. I might say to them, I might say to them, are you aware of the tail outcomes? And if they said, I have not assessed that, I would then put on my point that the business department is operating objectives without understanding the tail risk. I might assess them at their attitude around risk as well as their appetite. And at that point in time, is it my choice? No, I'm a second line of defence. My choice is to facilitate that they are doing the job and to report that to management. My job is not to make the decision. I don't have any skin in the game in that respect. I have skin in the game in this not getting done, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So Tina's question then is about the role of the compliance function. So we talked about the operational risk management function. Well, what would be the role of the compliance function in these questions, or in sort of the risk appetite discussion?
Well, first of all, risk appetite discussions are a compliant activity in itself, so they should be seeing what's going on as far as risk appetite is concerned and making sure that the business is actually doing this. And that includes that operational risk team have a process. And when I say a process, a proper approach to risk appetite, that it's being consistently applied. And the compliance team need to make sure that's happening. Other things, that the business is in harmony with that policy. This is the role of compliance. So compliance are there to make sure, okay, the business is actually in harmony and able to enact the questioning system that the second line of defence is putting together. That's the role of compliance. Finally, the role of compliance sits also in the second line of defence as if it's facing the risk. That is the business moving its appetite into places that are not compliant? I'll give you an example of this. A very simple one. Like, do I have a problem with driving at 100 kilometers an hour? Absolutely not. However, that doesn't make it legal. And so the compliance team should be saying, are you entertaining appetites or products that have appetite issues that are not compliant from the ground up? So we have the following roles if you're a compliance person. My job is to make sure that the operational risk team and the credit risk team are applying appetites across the organization. Market risk as well now. Under the new rules, Basel IV rules that have come out, we have a market risk appetite. It's a whole ball game in its own right. I'm not going to talk about that today. But yeah, so as a compliance person, I need to make sure the second line of defense, that's the people I stand alongside of, are doing their job. Yep, and they're doing it in a consistent way, and that it is functional. What I mean by functional is it's harmonious. That is, it's actually useful in a respect, and it's being able to be applied. And they may find that we're not compliant at that point. Secondly, my job is to act as if I'm in the second line of defence, facing the first line of defence, that the first line of defence is not entertaining activities that could have a questionable or issues with compliance. Let me give you an example. I recently found quite recently a bank that was an Islamic bank that wanted to short customers as an investment strategy, and I said to them, I'm not sure that's compliant. And I then spoke to a Sharia scholar, and he said that's absolutely not compliant behavior. So what the sales team want to do and what is compliant, even though they had an appetite for it. No, you're not allowed to do this even though you've got an appetite for it. So your appetite is actually greater than what is compliant. So this is the role of compliance team. You know what? These are great questions. I think we should write a blog on this and actually be explicit about this rather than implicit, about what the second and third line of defense. The third line of defense is to give assurance around all of this as well. So they kind of sit in the holding the hat of the second line of defense and the first line of defense. But that's another discussion, again. But are we all good with this?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there are other questions, but they are more generic. So we'll come to that once we've gone through. I think some of the following slides may answer some of those questions. So let's go ahead, and then I'll address there. But there are 7 or 8 very good questions there waiting for us.
Right. So let's carry on. It's going to get a bit more technical for a moment. technical, not from a risk appetite perspective, just technical from a risk perspective. Now, one of the things I find most disappointing, particularly in the LinkedIn forums, is I see people look at risk, mostly, honestly, people see risk as just purely a negative thing. They say they don't, but they're lying to themselves. Yeah, because they only have one response to a risk. Do I accept it? Do I treat it? Do I try to control it? Do I want more of it? I mean, yes, sometimes you want more of it. This is just really immature, yeah, and it's not what goes on in real life. What goes on in real life is a structured response to risk. And if you wait, I'll just wait for the slide to refresh, and you can see this here up on the screen. Now look at the left box just for the moment, and that's all you need to think about. Don't read the writing. The writing is what I'm going to say. So imagine here, each one of these little red dotted lines is an experience. Yeah, it's an experience each year. Yeah, so I've got like big ones and small ones, and oh, look at the one in the middle. That's super huge loss. That's a nasty, nasty event. Whereas most of the time here, on average, yeah, I've got very, very small losses. And this is just weather. It's like rain. People say, oh, I had a dry winter, a wet winter. Oh, we had a very wet winter. Oh, lots of floods. So do you have an appetite for floods? Yes or no? Now, this is where most people actually sit. Most people have an appetite for most things, but only up to a certain degree. So someone says to me, do I have an appetite to lending money? Of course, I'm a bank. I want to lend money. How about to defaulting clients, restructuring clients? That's a specific business model and it's high risk. I don't want too much of that. I need to be careful with that. So I'll have some appetite for different risks based on my opinion. So no one has a yes or no to risk. This is what like bugs me. Is people say, I don't have an appetite for that. I do have an appetite for that. It doesn't work like that. We have appetites for certain amounts, but not too much. So as you can see here, if I was to say I don't have an appetite for a flood, you would insure yourself at $1 loss. But the premiums would be so big. I don't know whether you can see my mouse. Maybe I should draw a line. I'll draw some maybe blue lines on here. So if you insure here, the premiums will be so big, you might as well just take the loss. Okay, so we realize we can't really negate this risk. We have to accept some of it. So where do you want to take it? And this is what the second line of defense should be assessing. Where does the business say, I don't have an appetite for this? All right, so we end up with a structured response to risk. Now this here is where I'm going to budget. This is my capital reserve. So I say anything in here, yeah, is my tail. This is my tail. Anything above this would be unacceptable, and I wouldn't have an appetite for that. Yeah, and so then at that point we then draw in and say, right, now at this point I'm going to hedge it, so I'm going to go and get an insurance contract here. Yeah, but people say, but why would you insure all the way for infinity? So if I insure infinity, my appetite again is not being compensated properly, because it's very improbable. What's the chance of having a flood so big that you end up in like 2 miles below the water? It's improbable. Yeah. So here I'll say, look, I'll cap this loss. Yeah, and we'll straddle this contract. So I say here at the bottom, yep, this is general day-to-day business. I will absorb this risk. I have an appetite for this. Yep. This is part of my tail risk. Yep. After that, in section C, I transfer the loss. And then in section D, guess what? I go long on the risk again. I take it back on. It's an incremental improbability. And so you can see now that this is the structured response to risk that a typical business unit would have. Yep. They will take on some parts of risk and not others. And this is how it's really, really happening. Now, the idea of the second line of defense is to present a model like this to the business unit, saying, look, you've got these activities going on. Where does that risk of that end? If the business unit says to me, I'm not sure, we know that they haven't got it together. Yeah, and at that point in time, I'd have to go, risk appetite gets a red mark. This business unit is unable to assess its risk appetite. But I tell you, I've assessed business units. Most business units are able to accommodate. They'll say, Martin, this is typical business. We expect these losses. This is a typical day-to-day business. After this, it goes into our loss reserves. However, after that point, we've got an appetite. Our appetite ends, at which time we transfer it or we insure it, or it just may end and it may have no treatment. So you can see here, I've got an A, a B, a C, and a D. I've got different types of risk like behavior around those same risks. And this is what's really going on when you speak to anybody, whether it's someone in loans or collections or even in the operations. Do I insure a branch for every kind of loss? That's be ridiculously expensive. Do I insure a branch for fire damage? Potentially, yes. Yeah. How about for, a broken window? No, we'll absorb that as day-to-day breakage and accidental issues. Yeah. So you can see here, my appetite is not static. It changes. Now, of course, if you start getting floods and you start having lots of damages, your appetite might change. And it will be the job of the second line of the defense to make sure that these appetites are being updated all the time. And in this respect, yeah, not only have I got a structured response to risk, I'm monitoring that. That's what a risk appetite framework should be doing. Yeah. And if you were to take all of these parts in place now, you can see I've got like 8 different areas. I've got a definitional layer. Without definitions, you don't really have anything. I've got a context layer to understand the inherent risks that you might have, whether you're skiing up a mountain or operating a branch. I identify those risks and then capture data around that. Some of that data we will know. It'll be like general losses that we can actually provision for and we can budget for very easily mathematically. Some of it will require us to do a simulation. Yep. After which I'll then be able to identify my tail events, my expected and unexpected area. And then from that, I should be asking the business unit management, where does your appetite end on these risks? Where is your tail exposure? Where are you comfortable, not comfortable? This is what risk appetite is truly should be about. Okay. How does that sound, Manoj? Does that sound logical?
It sounds I think it's very related to what organizations are struggling on the cyber risk at the moment, because the tail of, yes, a big cyber risk event or a big data breach is significant, both from a financial and reputational perspective. So organizations are trying to say, okay, how much insurance do we need to buy? Because you of course think about all the controls. But insurance is where I've seen, talking to some organizations where they're not sure, okay, how much insurance, cyber insurance should we buy to cover for this incremental, the D category, the top category?
I mean, I would only insure for the full amount if the premiums were like low. Yeah, and I mean, even still, you have to ask yourself if that's the right use of money. I mean, we actually extend this into a little example. So just before I went into this program, I decided to say, right, let me show you a straddle. Let me show you how I straddle risk. And I did it in the markets. I did an option trade. I actually didn't execute these trades because I didn't like them. And they had no objective. That's actually the reason why I didn't. But my objective here was to show you the pricing of these trades, from a premium level. And this is basically the CLV8 contract. This is crude oil, on October the 18th. And I've got three trades there, and it will show you how my appetite, I can describe my appetite around that. And you'll see how it changes based on the trade. The market is static from that perspective around it. It's changing all the time, of course, but like I made a decision. Okay, so the first trade is just a single call contract, typical to be done at this time of year. Oil often goes into contango. And look at that. My profit is actually infinite. I could make, I mean, oil is not going to go to $1 million a barrel, but I could make a huge amount of money there. But because you're taking on absolutely no risk, but you're taking huge profits, look at my premiums. And you can see here, there's like really nasty premiums. There's a $6,000. So, the market's saying, you know what, you want to be greedy like that? You want to give me the risk and you take all the profits, you'll pay a premium for that. Okay. Then let me do a straddle, similar to the concept I was showing you before with the insurance contract about floods. So I'll take a profit, but you know what? I'll hand back some of the losses back to the institution. And when you see that here, you can see, look at my cost now. So you can see my premium costs have come down. Instead of being 6,000 now, they're only 1,000. Why? Because I'm being not greedy, but generous. So I'm saying I'm going to share both the profits and the losses with the market. So I've been able to reduce my cost. And people say, well, what's the profit if you were to take the other side? If I was to split this contract in its 2 parts into just one of those legs, well, I can see the top leg, but if I want to look at the other leg that makes this contract, well, you can see here. Here I've got this credit contract, where I actually make $4,000. So I'm going to actually put 1, 2, 3. Contract number 2 is the outcome of both a positive and negative risk, and it gives me a straddle. This is what I truly mean by risk is not positive or negative. No one gets this really unless you're a trader. When I look at my outcome, I'm taking upside but I have a risk appetite around that upside, which is priced in by the two contracts. So from this, you can see here that our risk appetite, to learn from this, we can't just look at all risks individually. Yeah, we've got to look at the portfolio of effects, multiple risks at a portfolio level. And this, I'm finding that with a lot of business units or second lines of defenses, they're unable or incapable of doing this, as you probably will have discovered yourself from time to time. But from quite simply, if I know what my cost is, I know what to expect, I can understand my downsides and my tail threats, I should be able to price risk. And as you can see here, I've been able to do that. This is risk appetite working for us. It's showing us the cost of risk. It couldn't get better than that. It's completely transparent, what the market is willing to pay for on that risk. But this is market risk, isn't it? What we're dealing with is in the world of operational risk. We don't have these numbers. So if I was running a really good risk appetite framework, I would try and drive myself so I could get these numbers out. How would that framework look? Well, I've got this presentation up here. It's actually running in an active spreadsheet. I believe, and I'll dive into the spreadsheet for a moment. It should come up on the screen, fingers crossed. Yeah, I believe that a good risk framework should have these layers. Yeah, we should be capturing information about our objectives. We should be sensitive to the other risk faculties. Yeah, not just focusing on operational risk or enterprise risk. Yeah, and we should have in place a taxonomy, a definitional taxonomy layer. We should be registering our risks and capturing control. All these things we're currently doing. Yeah, it's all very straightforward. But from that, we should be capturing data that then aggregates. So if I was to have a risk appetite in here, it would be a very natural, simple thing to put on top of my framework. However, most companies I'm coming across are what I call just first generation. And I'll just click a button on my screen and you'll see it change. So they have a risk register and a control register in place. They're doing these horrible control self-assessment activities. And then they're generating these terrible heat maps, which doesn't really connect to my objective. It just is very negative downside looking at risk. And then they start to say, on top of that, I now have to assess risk appetite. If this is where you are at, and this is how you're going about risk appetite, it's going to be a fail. And that's as simple as that, in my opinion. What you need to be in place where you're capturing, well, I'll click the next button. I need to be capturing the objective, have a risk register, control, I have to have all these things in place, but actually be capturing experience, incidental data, outcomes from that, modeling that, then aggregating, which is actually, although mathematically complicated, straightforward in a software package, and then presenting that in an interactive dashboard. And I put the questions to management saying, these are your objectives. These are the types of tail risks you could experience. How do you want to structure your response to that? That's what risk appetite is all about. It's that final piece on a really good risk framework. But alas, most frameworks I'm coming across only have these like sparse bits in it, and they're missing. And then you try to jump from where you are now, just a handful of things, to an advanced risk appetite framework. It's going to be a fail. But if you do have these things in place, if you have reached this point where I've got all of the right parts in place, then theoretically risk appetite should be a process that you insert into the system. And that takes me to the next slide, like very simple. So here I've got risk definitions. Again, we've done this as part of our framework. I identify and assess my risks. I go out and model them, all part of the framework. I then aggregate it. It should already be in place. I should be then running a scenario analysis and stress test of that to make decisions on the tail experience. I mean, are we comfortable, not, as we've discussed? And then I set risk appetite limits based around that. And these risk appetite limits are a discussion between the committees, the first line of defense and the second line of defense. And then we monitor whether the business unit is staying within those agreed limits. That is a risk appetite process. Notice, actually, the only thing I'm really inserting in there is basically asking the business unit, are they comfortable with the risks? If they're not, how do they structure a response to change that? And then will they take or not take that? This is what risk appetite is. It should be something that's applied to an existing healthy risk framework. And I believe it should be done at a bottom-up process. So let's go back to our spreadsheet for a moment, actually live that process. I'll wait for the screens to refresh, and I'll explain what we're looking at with our model here. By the way, all those that are still on the call, you can download this spreadsheet model. There's a link that will give you the exact same spreadsheet that you're seeing here, and you can then play with this Monte Carlo simulation. This spreadsheet's designed as 3 basic parts. The first part is a business question. That business question will then generate a stochastic outcome that's simulated, and then from that we're going to do a benefit of cost. So just imagine, here I am, day on day, in my loan processing originating department, dealing with loans, sending loans out the door. Now, lots can go wrong with those loans. They could be fraudulent customers that don't repay back. I could have an error on the loan where I lend too much to a counterparty outside the limit. There are many things that could go wrong from an operational risk perspective. And I capture specific factors that you see here across a range, low, medium, high. By the way, this is not using any loss data. And in banks, I encourage the use of a hybrid system to generate the types of models that you see here. Another debate for another time. So here I can see I've got various different factors that I then combine into an outcome. Now let's actually run the simulation. I've set it all up, all ready to go. And I'm treating the control quality here as basically 2 parts. There is an error on the control of 200 basis points, and there is dispersion around the error. So I've got an error that I'm not really certain about, and I've got uncertainty around that uncertainty. That's quite nasty. Yep. And I'm going to then take the business that you see here in my spreadsheet, yep, and then model that by clicking the button. All right, so let me click MC Simulate. And then if I scroll down, you'll see the outcome of my simulation here. And it shows you the natural risk. So I expect, based on the parameters that I put in there, well, we could, it's quite possible we could hit this $4,000 mark. That's quite possible. I mean, if I look at my stratified sample set, like there's a 35–40% chance of losses in this space. How big could those losses come? Well, let's move down the tail. And as you can see, as I go to the bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger losses, of course, the probability down the side goes down. So this is like a distributional outcome from the assessment I've done at the top. Okay, do you have an appetite for that or not? Well, at the moment, I do or don't. It depends on the objective. I have to look at the revenue. So you can't actually answer the question, do I have an appetite on that or not? Because I don't know what the upside is. So this is one of the things I see people doing. They go around asking appetite questions, and they only have one side of the equation. They only have the profit without the loss. But let me take this further and give you something that they can say, do we have an appetite for it? Well, one way to test this would to say, what would it cost to treat this? Well, that's a good question. I mean, let's do another insurance example on it if you want. Okay, so now I'm going to the treatment decision center, and I can see my inherent risk, what I currently have now, and I can see my residual risk, what I'm left with, and I can say, look, here are these 2 places. They are the same, and why would they be? I haven't decided to do any treatments on it. Let me then investigate with the business unit and do a question. I say, well, we discuss with the business. We say, look, we can improve these controls. We could bring our losses down by 40%. Oh my gosh. And we can get an uncertainty. And you can see the thing simulating in the background. And we can get certainty around that. We can improve our error by 30%. Wow. And how much does that cost? Well, nothing comes for free. Yeah. So I've done an assessment. We've got the special change management team in, and they said, yep, we can improve these controls. We can insert another control, and we reckon, yeah, that we could reduce the control error by 40% and improve our quality around that control error by 30%. But it's going to come at a cost of $25,000. Do I have an appetite for that change or not? Well, the only way to know is to do a benefit of cost analysis. So let me click the benefit of cost analysis. What does that actually do? The benefit of cost analysis will basically say, here is our inherent risk. Let me rerun the simulation, and it's done it, of course, with the residual outcome. And it's done that. And if you look at over here, for an investment of $25,000, it's going to save you $20,000 in the first year. What do you think of that? Well, I've got about a 1.2-year payback. I mean, I personally would take it, but like the first year, we're not going to get any savings from that. Now, some of the businesses may say, I don't like that. I don't think that's a very good appetite. I mean, if this control cost went up to, let's say, $60,000, would I have an appetite for it? Now, of course, the control improvement is still the same. Let's run our analysis again. And you can see, actually, 2.8 years is my payback. Yeah. Do you have an appetite? It's going to take me 3 years to earn the money to pay this back. All other systems consistent. Well, the big thing to look at here to make a decision on it isn't just your expected loss. My expected loss, which is the green line, yeah, goes down by about 40%. That's nice. But if you look at the tail loss, look at the saving across the tail area, it's actually quite high. In fact, it's nearly the expected loss all over again. When you present that to the business now, suddenly they can say, actually, you know what? This is probably a good treatment response. Can I afford it? What's my opportunity cost? And then I can make a decision around my appetite around that. So what we've done now is we measured the risk using Monte Carlo, then looked at its treatment options to make a decision whether we should or should not accept that. And if we decide that we are not going to accept that the 3-year payback is unacceptable, we have to change our control area. This is what appetite is about. It's about saying, I'm comfortable or not comfortable with risk. If I'm not comfortable with it, let's look at the alternatives of treatments. Yeah, and let's see what the costs of those are. This should be a process that's in place, a process that the business unit is doing and that the second line of defense is monitoring. That is what a good, fully functioning risk appetite statement or risk appetite framework is about. Okay. Anyway, we can go into this Monte Carlo. I've left all the mathematics out, of course, just so that we can run through this presentation. But do feel free, if you want more information on that presentation or model that I just ran in the spreadsheet, reach out to me or Manoj, and we'll send it across to you. What's your thoughts with that, Manoj? All good?
Yeah, that's good. But we are in the last 10 minutes, Martin. So should we take some questions?
We can take some questions, or I can tell you what, I'll clean up and finish off. And then we'll take some questions then. Okay, so moving on to the Monte Carlo presentation, I want to show 2 things that are currently going on that are busted. And we need to stop doing this as a risk community. It's crappy, it's not helpful, it's expensive, and no one benefits from it. The first one, banks. The first one, banks are involved in doing. I think this is wrong. We are currently going out there at the moment and we are reporting risk. As you can see here, I actually have a sample report, a disclosure report from Australian banks based on their liquidity coverage ratio being sent to a regulator. There's no modeling on it. There's no seasonality, trends or stresses. There's no understanding of what derived this report. Yep, and it has no limit response. They just apply APS 330 and just do it and send the report to the regulators. This is what risk appetite is supposed to fix. It's supposed to fix that the reports that we generate in the business unit level and at the top have questions around them. Are you comfortable with this appetite? Are you able to accommodate it? Where could it go wrong and what treatment responses we should be putting in place? Risk appetite should not be detached from this. There should be risk reports and risk appetites. We are doing this as what we are currently doing, and it's a fail. We are failing. This is the first thing. How to get out of this? Well, I've got a solution to this problem. Present the report to the regulator, run a dashboard that you then work through with your business unit where you actually set limits. So now I've got an interactive dashboard where I can see specific limits, working with clients, and they can actually say, this is really hot. I don't like this. I want to change this. We need to change. And it's now an interactive, a full duplex discussion between management, board, stakeholders, first, second, and third line of defense, and the regulators. This is where we've got to get to. Risk departments are just running risk reports and just submitting them to regulators are not helping anybody. The regulator thinks they have transparency, but what's in the report, people may not be comfortable with it. They may just say, oh, look, report it. Are you comfortable with that? No, I haven't got any outcome on this. So this is one of the things risk appetites should be solving. Here is the next thing. Now, this is worse. Now, banks aren't doing this, thank goodness, but like some of the other companies are seeing that out there doing risk appetite statements, it's absolutely tough. And I've got a copy of one here. This is a risk appetite statement. I can't believe this. There was a company I came across that had a template. They were just filling out, putting their organization name in here. Put your organization name in here. My organization will not accept risks with a risk level of high or extreme and requires all risks to be controlled so that no risk levels are greater than high. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. It's absolutely tarse. You know what the biggest problem is? This is insincere. The business unit will be carrying on. The first line of defense will be carrying on with its activities as it chooses. The risk department's just writing these stupid policy documents. This is a fail. And we got when risk appetite turns into this, or it's not applied to what's going on in reporting, we've failed. The solution to this problem is to follow the following. Yeah. Now this is this is my last slide now. This is the FSB simple guideline on what a risk appetite framework should be. A process for communication, both board level and bottom up, that embeds risk appetite into the culture and into the measurement system of risk. This is what we should be doing. Yeah, evaluating opportunities like we did with our benefit of cost in our Monte Carlo model. Yeah, defending against excessive risk taking, where the business unit steps outside its limits. Yeah, helping the internal audit function, assess that we are doing this front to back. Yeah, at a consistent level. This is what we should be doing, not these stupid appetite statements. I've never seen anything before where they just take appetite statements and they literally cut and paste and put their organization name in there. It's just evil. It's insincere. And if risk management turns into these templates, we've lost the plot. I believe that most risk appetite frameworks I'm seeing in the majority of organizations I'm working with are poor. They fit into one of these two failures. They're either just cutting and pasting rubbish, or they're supplying risk reports and appetite statements separately, and they're not connected. If you follow this single slides guidelines, and I've highlighted and bolded what's important, if you do this, risk appetite actually doesn't even exist. It'll accidentally happen. It will just happen because you'll be discussing risk with business units and asking them, how do you want to structure a response to this risk? And they will have appetites for some parts of it, as we saw in our insurance example, or our oil trade, and they won't have appetite for others. All right, so that's it from me. I don't want to eat up all the time, otherwise there will be no time for questions. And I hand the floor back to you. I hope you enjoyed that, Manoj. I hope the team enjoyed it. We didn't lose too many attendees, so I don't know, maybe they're just on mute and watching YouTube. You never know. I'll pop back to you, and I'll be now no longer the presenter. Is that how it works? I hand the machine
you
back
can
to you.
You can stay as the presenter in case you need to look at some slide in context of a question. But what we'll do is we will stay maybe extra 15 minutes for the sessions. If people do have questions they want to ask, then we'll run the session slightly longer than the planned time. So if you don't have questions, then audience can disconnect from the session, but we'll stay. Martin and I will stay here for another 15 minutes so we can tackle some of these questions. So let's do a question from Chris. So in the discussion today, Martin, you talked about expected loss, tail risk, but where does reputational impact fit into the risk appetite context? Because you sort of have this challenge around quantifying the reputational impact of operational risk events. What would be your response of how do we factor in reputational impact in the appetite discussion?
Okay, I mean, I've got a funny story around reputational risk. Anyway, I'm actually looked upon by the risk community as being someone that's very supportive of reputational risk, and I wasn't always like that. I was giving a presentation some years back, and someone asked me the same question, and I said, I don't do reputational risk. I'm one of these guys that look for something that's semi-tangible that I can measure. And then I looked at this guy's poor eyes, and he looked like he was going to cry, and I felt like really damaged by this. And so I then invested a huge amount of time to develop a phenomenal presentation on reputational risk, to actually go out and measure it and to identify different appetites around different types of reputations. I will share that presentation with you next week. I'll clean it up, and we can then put that up there as an artifact, as an outcome of this. And if people want to actually go through that, we can have another webinar on reputational risk. But in the context, to answer the question directly, reputational risk needs its own framework and infrastructure. It needs its own assessment approach. Yeah, there will be it in itself will have areas of appetite and non-appetite. These days, reputational risk is actually a big concern, partly because of the type of economy and social economy we're living in. There are people out there that have huge followings in LinkedIn, Facebook forums, Twitter, and so on and so forth, and anything can go public very quickly. But there needs to be a treatment response to reputational risk that's in line with appetite. So there will be some things that we will accept some things that we won't accept. Business units themselves need to be asked questions. From a reputational perspective, I mean, this is what I'd insert in my question list. From a reputational perspective, when you look at your risks, do you see risks that have reputational outcomes? Could you see some of those outcomes becoming severe? And, you know, where would your appetite end on that? And some business units may say, look, you know what, I'm about lending here. Of course, some of our products could have reputational outcomes, but you need to speak to the marketing department or someone else. So as soon as, I mean, that's what I would say. If someone asked me that question, I'd transfer the risk to someone else. So there needs to be, it's a very valid question. There needs to be a special approach for reputational risk in the risk appetite framework, and it's beyond the slides that we have here, you know, in reality. But it needs to feature. It's an important thing. It needs to feature, in my opinion.
Yeah, but if we factor in the reputation, because reputational risk, you can either sort of look at reputational risk as a separate category, like strategic risk, credit risk, market risk, operational risk, and then you have reputational risk as a independent category. But in the operational risk context, so if you look at the TSB system upgrade disruption, you know, which happened when they were trying to upgrade the core banking system, and then there was severe reputational impact when they got the migration wrong. So do you, in the risk appetite, how would you factor in that if you are going to upgrade your core banking system, or if there's a bank is running 5,000 different IT systems and these systems are getting upgraded, you know, every week, every month, every quarter, how would you factor in the appetite? That do you just quantify that as a result of the reputational impact, if we lose 5% of our customer, then, you know, we sort of look at, okay, what would be the potential loss of revenue from if we lose 5% of our customers if our system upgrade fails?
Okay, there is a way to model that. I mean, and I've got another presentation on how to model that. That's separate. From a risk appetite perspective, to stay contextually relevant here, I would say to a business unit, from the current activities that you are engaged in, you have risks. Do these risks have knock-on effects that could have reputational outcomes? Yeah, and if so, how big could those outcomes become? Yeah, and, you know, where would your appetite around that end? So business units likely say, well, look, you know, we could have outages here, yeah, that could impact the customer pool, but I'm not the only stakeholder involved in that, and we need to do an assessment on that, make a decision whether we're happy, whether marketing happy, whether the head of sales is happy. I mean, I would have thought an outage that involved 5% of our customers leaving us would be catastrophic. Those damages are huge. That's severe. I would classify. I would see that as a very negative outcome from a system change. 5% loss of customers is terrible. But who's me to say whether that's good or bad? You know, I mean, there may be another business head will say, look, between you and me, we're being taken over anyway, and it doesn't really matter. We have as much appetite as we want. I mean, okay. So suddenly the appetite's changed because you've involved another stakeholder. What reputational risk needs to be at the table. One, reputational risk needs to feature in part of the second line of defense's questioning system. 2, reputational risk needs its own reporting and committee system. 3, and 4, there needs to be a feedback loop for appetite for it. And that's the most mature point I can answer at this point in time. How you go about doing that, I need to delve off into another presentation I have, which is about, you know, another 60 slides, how to go about measuring reputational risk. I actually have those slides, and I'm willing to share them as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's see if we can take a couple more questions here. So in context of operational risk, so there's one question on here, whether we can use an example on setting risk limit for an operational risk perspective, because I think we've looked at some examples around market risk and credit risk. So is there any sort of context where how would we define, so if we are upgrading, let's say we are undertaking a project to upgrade our core banking system, it's going to cost 50 million, it'll take us 3 years. So as part of that project where there is no revenue objective, right? So the upside is that, yeah, we will have a more modern system, which will allow us to be more agile going forward into the future, but there is no direct linkage between upgrading our core banking system from a legacy mainframe to a modern cloud-based system. But I am taking a lot of operational risk as part of that massive migration, because it's a big project, 400, 500 people involved. And if it goes wrong, I have severe financial, reputational impact, because it'll impact all my customers if I don't get that right. Then how would you go about thinking about setting limits for operational risk in that sort of a context?
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a project, but like just generally, what I would do is I go out and attempt to measure it. Yeah. My favorite tool for measuring operational risk is Monte Carlo, but it's not the only tool. So again, another discussion. And I present a report like you're seeing on my screen right now. And this is a stochastic like simulation. Yeah. It's not looking at risk as a single number. And I'll say to the business unit, here are your potential outcomes. And they'll say, you know what? If that's our tail risk, no issues. We'll take the whole lot. Okay. You know, that's unlikely to be the case. I mean, in a real environment, they're going to say, look, we experience these risks between the 2,000 and 3,000 zone, as you're seeing on the screen right now. We experience this. We're used to this. When the losses get to $5,500, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, this is outside our comfort zone. And so what I do is I measure these risks and I say, where is your appetite end? Yep. And how will you know that that's coming about? And that's what I ask them. And if they say, I have no appetite around this, I'll say, right. And you'll get people that say, I have zero appetite. And we know that that's a strange place because it's zero risk space. That means you need to circumvent yourself from the activity. I mean, there will be people that say, I have no appetite for something. For whatever, it could be ethical reasons. Like, I mean, let's say I go to a church and say, oh, can we drink in the church? No appetite for alcohol here. Okay, right. So there's a zero tolerance for it. It's just zero tolerance. It can be zero tolerance, yeah. But you need to ask those questions around the risks, and they'll say the following things. This one we've measured and we expect these outcomes. But when it reaches this type of number sizes or this type of frequency levels, they're getting too big, too frequent, that we got to treat them. That we have to change the way we're behaving. We're uncomfortable with that. We'll take so much risk to a certain point. I mean, think about yourself flying in an aeroplane. You're flying along. Let's say the turbulence is bad, so people are starting to jiggle around, and then it's reaching a point now where people are flying around the cabin. The pilot might. Do you think he's going to sit there and say, oh, Bob, I might just go to the bathroom quickly. Let's leave first class with the food on the ceiling. No, they're going to call ground control and say we need to change our mission. We need to fly in a different altitude, change our route to avoid the catastrophes they're going in. What I do as a second line of defense, I ask the business unit owners, where are these crunch points? Where does your limit expire? What are the conditions that make your limit expire? Yeah. So I might accept here's a great one. Do you accept an uncollateralized loan with a AAA rated customer? Yes, potentially I do. Do you accept an uncollateralized loan with a CCC minus customer? Probably not. My appetite is different for that person. I still accept it, but it's a different kind of loan structure. I need to respond to that risk differently. And what I do is I ask the business unit, do you know your risks? If they don't know the risks, there's no appetite, this is very serious. Do you know your risks? Are you actually measuring them so that you actually have comfort zones and non-comfort zones around those? And they'll say, I have comfort zones and non-comfort zones. Can you express those to me? My second line of defense should be capturing this information. If you're doing this, it's working properly.
Yeah.
And that's
it. And if I just translate then into the operational risk example we talked about, so if we are upgrading, so let's say we're going to spend 50 million is our budget, and it's going to take 3 years for us to do the upgrade. So in that case, one objective is the timeline that we have 3 years to complete the migration. And that's where you may say that, okay, you have an appetite that if there is a delay of 3 months or 4 months or 6 months, so you have to decide how much your appetite or limit, whatever you want to call that how much are you willing to accept, or is you have to go live, after 3 years, that there is a delay of even an hour is unacceptable. So, and that's where it'll be unreasonable, right, that to say that no, I have to go live exactly at 12 o'clock on that day after 3 years. So an organization may have appetite in terms of a minor delay on that sort of migration, but what it may not have appetite for is getting it wrong, that once we go live, and if things start going wrong where our customers can't access their account, or they log in but they actually see money in somebody else's account, then that's where you may say that, okay, there is zero appetite for something like that, right? That if we say the migration is complete, we can't get it wrong once the system goes live after migration.
Yeah, which is why we do like dry runs and backups. I mean, around that, if someone says to me, I must go live at 12 o'clock in 3 years' time, I'd say, why? I'd ask them why. Why have you picked a date so far in a strike position, so far in the future that's so fine? And they may say something like, well, that's the day the space shuttle takes off, or that's the day that the markets will open, and we will lose millions of dollars. We're not there. There may actually be a reason for it. If they just say, I want accuracy around that, then I would then tag that person as having unsuitable risk appetites that are going to be very hard to meet, expectations that are difficult. And you will come across this. I've met people, honestly, we meet them all. I've walked in the business units. I had the business unit manager once. I said to him, I'll never forget this, what type of risks does your business unit have? And I was working for operational risk for a bank. And you know what he said to me? He says, could you just define that further? I said, well, risks, and I was about to show him the risks. And then he said, are these the risks for the bank or my risks? Mm-hmm. Which basically are more personal risks. Or, if you're dealing with people at that level, and that's the type of answers you're going to get back, they're not even measuring it. They have no appetite around it. It's a complete fail. So this is the thing. If I'm starting to have a sensible conversation with the business unit where they said, these are our risks, this is where their limits end. This one has accuracy on it, where in 4 years' time, we must launch with a capacity of 4,000 units per second. And it must happen on the 15th of May next year. Then I'll ask a reason why, and they may say, because that's what our agreement is with our vendors. If we don't do that, we get a $10 million fine. Whoa, now I realize there's an outcome that's negative if we don't meet a goal. So suddenly I start to put parameters around that. And you'll find that often in most corporations, these parameters do exist. Okay.
Yeah. And a related risk from Tina is around, can we tie sort of that with an example around anti-money laundering or sanctions, where your first slide is dealing with a lot of customers on a day in and day out basis, where they're issuing loans, they're issuing mortgages, they're issuing financial products, delivering financial services. And the uncertainty is that some of those potential customers may be criminals, maybe terrorists, maybe trying to use our financial products to commit money laundering. So what have you seen organizations say their risk appetite is in that context? Because you can't say you have zero tolerance, but then if you say you have tolerance for that sort of risk, then your regulator may not like that. So how have you seen organizations deal with something like that?
We have to be very real. I think at the moment, and there could be several people on this call that will not like what I'm about to say, I'm a banker at the end of the day. I'm a risk person. I don't believe in zero risk. There is a battle going on between risk departments or compliance departments, as it is, and criminals. Criminals realize the banking system is useful to them because it allows them to facilitate all sorts of crimes. The banking system, by the way, does not advertise itself as a place where criminals hang out. We suffer from these people. By the way, a good AML system will also reduce your fraud. I have mathematical proof of this. A lot of the controls, no KYC controls that we use for fraud, also overlap AML. However, if anybody goes out and says to me, "Oh, it's terrible," there was a money laundering drug ring that was floating inside your lending system. This is possible. There's no such thing as zero risk. Oh, you should know your customers. Sadly, some of our customers are politicians that have drug problems. It can go many ways. So a customer can have a clean appetite, a clean slate, and still be a criminal. It's not uncommon. There are sorts of different case studies over the years that have proven we've had good customers that have gone rogue. A customer is perfect, and then 5 years later, they're not perfect. They become like a center of, or the customer, you can get, I've actually seen this in accounts myself, where I go, oh my gosh, this is a really big company. This is BHP, as an example. And then suddenly, there's money laundering going on, not because of BHP, because of an operator inside BHP. And am I responsible for that? No, I'm following the rules. So we need to be real. The criminals are fighting to use our systems, and we are trying to police this. And we need to police this to a level where it's not iatrogenic. And what does that mean? If you want no money laundering in banking, close the bank, and you'll get no money laundering. But then you circumvent your purpose in life. So I have to accept that there will be cases of money laundering going on. Is that acceptable? There is. What isn't acceptable? We treat these like a hospital treats someone with the flu. It's an illness that we're trying to resolve. We're fighting it all the time, but we fight it so that we don't ruin our main purpose of being in existence in the first place. Banks have this whole equation wrong at the moment. They're partly because they see risk as something that can be managed to zero, and I don't believe in that. I believe that the criminals are fighting and we are fighting. There's a battle going on. There's a battle going on with flu. The flu virus is, mutating so that it can infect new hosts. We then fight it, it mutates. Bank control is the same. Criminals are trying to steal from us. It's a continual battle. We change control, improve control. They find ways to evade control. It's an endless cycle. But if anybody ever says, I must have zero money laundering going on or zero fraud, any of these things really are not living in the real world. It's a battle. But at the same token, if anybody says, I've got to get to zero, you're going to circumvent your very existence in the first place. My job as a banker at the end of the day is there to serve my customers and to keep my customers safe from fraud and to not engage in criminal activity. It's a policing activity.
And that's where I've seen some organizations say that there is zero tolerance for an internal employee facilitating a criminal to commit money laundering. So that definitely is zero tolerance. That if that is found, then that employee will immediately have repercussions of facilitating or intentionally facilitating. But where it's a genuine transaction and we have our controls in place and we're trying our best to detect whether this is a criminal or this is a money laundering transaction, then you just accept that you will not have 100% success in terms of detecting. So there, I think you just have to demonstrate that you're doing the best in terms of mitigating that particular risk. But you cannot say that we have zero tolerance for money laundering.
My advice for bankers is the following. And it reminds me of a conference I was at years ago. I was a speaker that was coming up a little bit later, but there was this compliance nut job, like giving a speech about control. And they stood there and they said, we must have zero incursion, zero control failure. We must have 100% fiduciary clients. And I realized at that point that was just not possible. And I said to them, we're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to make banking easy, fast, straightforward for our clients. Zero control error means lots of control, complicated, long-winded systems. And for what it's worth, I kid you not, I went to open a bank account the other day, and this was ridiculous. It took the bank 3 months to open. I'm not going to say the name, but I really should punish them. It took them 3 months to open the account. And why? Because of money laundering compliance. I said, this is ridiculous. Or they said, we've noticed that you transact overseas. I travel overseas. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make me a money launderer. So like you can see, they've over-applied the rule. It's iatrogenic. The biggest challenge for operational risk people is actually identifying iatrogenic behavior and fighting it. We have to fight the fighters. Our job with money laundering, our responsibility, our accountability is to report. We're not there to police. That's someone else's job. We report. So when you take the recent problems that some of the banks in Australia have been suffering from, they're not reporting. It's tragic. When I look at over control of some of the banks in Singapore, it's also tragic. It's tragic. They're iatrogenic. They've gone too far. It's both unhealthy. It's a real sadness if the cure kills the client. And that's where we're at. We're at the moment, anti-money laundering control is obscene. It's either obscene or not being applied properly. We seem to find both the left and right end of the tail of illness, and we need to correct this. Might I add, the Bank for International Settlements has released a document called Risk-Based Anti-Money Laundering. We need to read this and focus on it because it actually addresses the very thing I'm talking about now, about how to apply controls that are effective, but not iatrogenic. And that's where our appetite should be.
Excellent. Okay, we've run out of our extended time also, so let's close this session, Martin. So thank you very much for coming and sharing. I've got some really good positive feedback about the topic in the chat window here. So I'm sure attendees have found this useful, and we can continue the discussion. So there is another workshop. The England and Wales chapter of IOR is running on the 27th of September in London, where I'll be facilitating. So I won't be presenting, but I'll just be running the workshop. And facilitating a discussion between operational risk practitioners from different organizations on what are you guys doing around operational risk appetite. So if you want to come and then drill down a little bit more into some of the topics we talked about and other topics which may be of interest, which we didn't cover today, then that workshop would be a good opportunity, but it's London-based, so it may not be easy for everybody globally to come and attend that. And then the next webinar we're going to do is on 24th October, where we get Enda Tomi from Ulster Bank. So he is responsible for risk culture in the bank, and he's going to come and talk about some of the levers we can use in terms of understanding the risk aspect of an organizational culture and what can we do to shape that culture in a direction where we may want. So that's on 24th of October. The details are on the IOR website. So please go ahead and register if that topic is of interest for you. So thank you very much, Martin, and thank you very much to all the participants for attending today. We will talk again on 24th.
Sounds great.